Hello, Morim here. In today's video I want to show you the strongest lightning leveling build for Diablo 4. Season 2 is packed with changes, so updates are in order. This also means endgame builds will need to be re-evaluated, given updates to monster power and the new bosses being added. As for this bad boy, it's my go-to build for starting the season. It deals incredible damage, is relatively safe, has great AoE, good single target damage and also allows for decently safe play due to supporting skills. The biggest drawback is the mobility. Druids also lack innate movement speed and Lightning Storm is a channeled skill. Now it's not a big deal because we can charge up the ability and walk from pack to pack. However, you will have to stand still to get there. But once you get the ball rolling, you won't feel it anymore. Speaking of which, you feel nothing. Druids feature a multitude of skills and passives to make for a tanky character. What about transitioning into endgame? We are completely fine. You are going to electrocute your way through a variety of content, especially nightmare dungeons. You are an AoE beast and make for a top tier farmer. And you are not dependent on uniques or legendary powers. They enhance the build, but do not make it. The Paragon board, endgame aspects, access to better gear really ramp up your power. Changes to the Thunderstruck legendary node on the board also give us no vulnerable dependent scaling, which still can be easily combined with crits. This completely changes how this character is built once you reach tier 3 and 4. Just based on my Excel sheet math, we are going to have much more consistent and possibly higher damage, without the need for Tempest Raw. We can easily stay human and just utilize Uber Uniques, which can now be target farmed. To further optimize the build, we are also going to use consumables and gems, which now add a ton of power for each build in form of resistances. But before we dive into the actual build, let's have a look at today's sponsor, Dungeon Hunter 6. A new, highly awaited installment in the long-standing mobile ARPG franchise spanning multiple entries since 2009. In this game you are playing as a bounty hunter with multiple class options available to you to slay foes and get loot. Combat is fast-paced, action-heavy and has great fantasy-style visuals. Customization for creating your own build is also available. And all of this is absolutely free. You can download it now using the link in the description or scan the QR code visible on the screen if you're watching on PC. As for the main feature of Dungeon Hunter 6, killing a boss is not the end. Once defeated in a special ritual, you can summon up to 3 of them to become part of your squad, enabling you to perform combo skills with them. Some of those bosses can be used as a mount, and some others enable you to shapeshift into them. Over 100 bosses are available in the game, with new classes and new bosses being added monthly, further expanding the pool of potential combinations. And to top everything off, the graphical fidelity and performance of Dungeon Hunter 6 also vastly improved with smoother and much more optimized mobile gameplay. But what about the other features? Obviously, grinding out skill trees and unlocking boss monsters is one of them. You can also dive into multiplayer activities with your guildmates to tackle real-time guild wars in PvP battles. And there is also a trade system to liquidize your hard-earned loot. As mentioned before, you can download the game right now for free on both Android and iOS. Use my link in the description box for this, or scan the QR code on screen if you're watching on PC. Using my link will also get you a special starter pack worth $50, which includes 10 summoning scrolls, a very strong SSR, demonic wolf monster, and 1 accessory pack. Currently there is also a launch event going on, the Lucky Spin, which started on the 15th of October. It allows you to win prizes like an iPhone 15 Pro Max, a PS5, Apple Watch and more. So next let's have a look at the planner. This one is located on Mobalytics. Down below, right here, in the build details, you will find basically every single topic discussed. You can find the gameplay loop here, which weapon to use. Basically every single detail is described here. At the bottom you will find some leveling tips. But for those of you that are watching the video, let's go over the skill tree first. On the right side you will find a step-by-step guide on what to pick first and what to pick last. We're going to start with Wind Shear right here, pick up Enhanced Wind Shear next, then Lightning Storm and Enhanced Lightning Storm. Now Enhanced Lightning Storm is a little bit special. Down below here is a description of this one. So when this one becomes available, this passive, you will be able to control the stages of your Lightning Storm. So when you first cast Lightning Storm, you're only going to see 1 strike come down, hit 1 enemy and that's it. The longer you channel, the more strikes occur in a larger area. Stage 1 should never be used consistently. So only use it one time to channel this one to stage 2. After reaching stage 2, you will now strike with 2 strikes and the area of effect is going to increase to cover at least 1 complete enemy and 1 enemy besides it. So it's going to increase the radius. However, most enemies in the game will overlap with both strikes. So those strikes can only occur in that radius in the middle. This means stage 2 doubles your damage. for a single target, always. It's incredibly strong, but if you channel this one further, meaning you hold down the button of Lightning Storm, the area will increase. So how do you keep this one at stage 1? Just tap the button. So if you have the keybind on E, tap E, then press E again, then press E again. Never hold it down after reaching the desired stage. Bigger bosses demand more stages. So if you're fighting a larger boss, you can safely go to stage 2 and hit them with 3 strikes. And for world bosses, you can channel this one to the last stage, so you can hit them with 5 strikes each time. Meaning if your base damage is 40, with 2 strikes it's 80. With 3 strikes, 120, and so on and so forth. So it increases in damage more and more, and this will result in a very strong single target spell. Now with the explanation out of the way, let's go over the skill tree. After picking up the stages, Enhanced Lightning Storm, you want to pick up Wild Wind Shear. Wild Wind Shear will give you 3 additional spirit for each enemy hit beyond the first. So if you're striking multiple enemies in a line, in a group for example, you're going to regenerate a lot of spirit. This one regenerates 14. So if you're hitting 2 enemies, you're going to generate enough spirit to cover the cost. So you can Lightning Storm, then Wind Shear, and alternate between those two to create your damage loop. Once you have the baseline, you can pick up your defensive cooldown, Earthen Bulwark. This will give you then access to Enhanced Earthen Bulwark, which is your unstoppable buff early on. Later on, you will find a Vampiric Power, so you can drop Earthen Bulwark for something else. But for now, we're going to pick this one. Next, go for Bloodhowl. Get Enhanced Bloodhowl to reduce the cooldown when killing enemies. And finish up with Innate Bloodhowl. Innate Bloodhowl will give you 20 spirit whenever you use this one. Since we are resetting the cooldown of this one constantly because we kill enemies, we can spam this one, which will result in a ton of additional health and spirit. Afterwards, we get access to Ravens. Pick up Enhanced Raven for 8% increased critical strike chance versus enemies struck by the passive Ravens. So you will have Ravens cycling around you constantly. They will strike down targets. Those ravens cannot be damaged and cannot die, so they're permanently up, and they will debuff foes, so you have a higher critical strike chance. This is exceptionally strong versus bosses. The passive damage is also quite high. And we pick up Brutal Ravens for 40% additional damage, and you get 2 additional ravens. So you now have 3 passive ravens cycling around you. This is very important because of an aspect, Shepherd's Aspect. The Shepherd's Aspect can be found on a gear. You can find this one in the Blood-Soaked Crag in the Dry Steppes. So unlock this one, it's in the Codex. And this one will increase the damage you deal by 6 to 10% for each active companion. We have 3 ravens cycling around us, so those are active companions, which increases the damage of our core skills by 18 to 30%. This is a massive increase in damage, and it's permanent. So once you're done with the ravens, we want to scale our damage even further. We max out Lightning Storm. At around level 20, we want to increase our defenses a little bit. So we are going to pick up 3 points in Ancestral Fortitude for 15% all resistance, and Vigilance for 15% damage reduction whenever we Bloodhowl or Earthen Bulwark. At level 26, we can pick up Cataclysm, our ultimate skill. This will increase our damage to bosses massively. So whenever you find a tougher enemy, press Cataclysm. This will deal enormous damage to them. Pick up Prime Catalyst to increase the duration, and pick up Supreme Cataclysm to make enemies vulnerable struck by the lightning strikes conjured by Cataclysm. Afterwards, we are picking up a little bit of damage with Defiance, so 12% more damage versus elites with our lightning strikes. Cycle of Life to gain sustain. We can combine this one with a Vampiric Power, which is the Undying Power. So Undying is going to increase this one to 6%. Whenever we cast our lightning strike, we're going to regenerate 6% maximum life. Undying also works on Wind Shear. And then we get access to our Keystone. Now for the Keystone we have 2 options. We can either go with Perfect Storm. This will regenerate a little bit of spirit every time we deal damage, we cast a spell. The damage will increase by 15% versus vulnerable, immobilized or slow targets, but the damage buff is restricting. So another option for more damage is going to be Ursine Strength, because the while healthy deal increased 25% damage is going to stay active despite not being a werebear. So you can get 25% more damage through Ursine Strength. I personally prefer the Perfect Storm because of the increased spirit generation. You're going to have trouble generating spirit, so having this one is essential, at least for me. This is the core of the build. Afterwards, we're going to flesh out the build. So we pick up Preserving Bulwark for 18%, maximum life gained is 45. Then we pick up Predatory Instinct, as well as the Jittergrade Gate for 9% movement speed while we are in werewolf form. And when we leave the form, this one also persists for 3 seconds. So whenever we Bloodhowl, we get a movement speed buff. Really nice for leveling, especially at that stage. Afterwards, we want a little bit of damage. So we're going with Elemental Exposure, then Charged Atmosphere. This one got buffed, so it's not 18 seconds, but 14 seconds on a cooldown. We pick up Electric Shock to get a chance, a lucky hit chance, to immobilize targets. And if we already immobilize targets, our lightning damage is going to increase by 21% to them, so they are getting debuffed. Pairs very nicely with Primal Lightning Storm, which we picked up at level 7. Lightning Storm has a non-lucky hit chance of 12%, so this one is not reduced by any modifiers, so it's always 12% to immobilize targets. This one stacks with Electric Shock, so it's much more likely to get the multiplier going. Afterwards, pick up Bad Omen. On a vulnerable, immobilized or stunned target, we can now have a chance to strike them with a lightning bolt again. This one has a quite high base damage of 55%. That's basically another strike as a bonus. Then we pick up Resonance. This one gives us 6% unconditional more multiplier damage, which is tripled whenever we Earthen Bulwark for one single strike. So not much, but it's consistent damage. Then we go back to the companion cluster and pick up Nature's Reach. 9% increased damage to distant enemies. Doubled if they are slowed, stunned, immobilized or knocked back. At this stage we have enough access to spirit generation and reduced spirit cost, so we can now think about picking up Wild Heart and then Wild Impulses, 3 points here. 9% more spirit cost, so this one is going to increase to 16, but we also deal 15% more damage. A really good trade-off. And lastly we finish up with 2 points in Natural Disaster, so it's going to be 8% increased damage enemies that are stunned, immobilized or knocked back. However, we can sacrifice those damage points and pick up Elemental Exposure, so we have a longer vulnerable duration whenever this one procs. However, the chance is extremely low, so I prefer the Natural Disaster. Next, let's go over the Spirit Boons. For the Spirit Boons, we are going to pick up the Deer with Wariness, the Eagle with Sky of Talons first, then Bolster with the Wolf, then Snake with Calm Before the Storm, and finish up with Avian Wrath for a 30% more multiplier. This one will substantially increase the damage whenever you critically strike. It's very worth it. However, if you're struggling with defenses, we don't know how hard it's going to be, Iron Feathers might be better. That's a 14% more multiplier to maximum health. So if you have maximum health already, you can then pick this one up to more multiply it again. It's a really strong passive. Down below you'll find how to unlock the Spirit Boons and the progression in what order you want to unlock those. Next, let's go over the equipment. I filled this one up, so you can technically use the weapon slots. However, I would not recommend you to put anything in here because you're going to exchange your weapon every like 50 item power. It's much more worth it to increase your item power. Increasing the base damage is always going to be more worth it. Now for the core aspects on this build, you want to have the Shepherd's aspect on the amulet for the 50% more bonus. This one can be obtained in Bloodsoaked Crag in Dry Steps, increase your damage by 18%, the Codex one. Next up on the chest, the Aspect of Might will give you 20% damage reduction. You can find this one in the Dark Ravine in the Dry Steps, so complete this dungeon one time to unlock the Codex one. The Overcharge aspect will give you a ton of additional damage. It's a lucky hit proc, but every single strike you deal will then also repeat the pulse. So if you're striking them with 5 strikes, 5 pulses will go off. It's an incredibly strong aspect. You can find this one in the Marine Refuge in Skosglen. Put this one on your gloves, but make sure that your gloves have the ranks to Lightning Storm on them. It's very unlikely that you're going to exchange those gloves until the end game, because this one increases the more multiplier on the base damage. For mobility, you want to have the Ghost Walker aspect. So while you have Unstoppable and 4 seconds afterwards, you're going to see a substantial buff to your move speed and you can move and pass through enemies. Very nice defensively. You can find this one by completing the Broken Bulwark in Skosglen. Now there's a bunch of other aspects you can find. If you're lacking damage, you can go for the aspect of Expectant. So when you weave in your basic attacks, you can increase your damage of your next core skill. This one can be found in Underrot in Skosglen. Another aspect that's really strong for damage is the aspect of Retaliation. Since we are always fortified because of our Blood Hall and our Earthen Bulwark and the Bolster Spirit Boon, we basically always get the 20% benefit from this one. You can find the aspect of Retaliation in the Seaside Descent in the Dry Steps. I have this one on the offhand, but you can exchange this one with the aspect of the Expectant and then just keep the ring. Like I said, you're going to exchange your offhand quite often. Other aspects you can find that I found personally to be very strong. One of them is the Runeworker's Conduit. Whenever you critically strike, you're going to stack up a buff. Every 0.5 seconds, a lightning strike will occur that deals flat damage. This one can deal quite an enormous amount of damage. So if you find this one with a high item power, put this one on the ring. It's passive damage, you never need to think about this one. It's really good. Another one you can find, but that's really rare, is the Lightning Dancer's aspect. So when you critically strike enemies with your Lightning Storm, 3 dancing bolts will then seek out enemies and deal lightning damage. free lightning damage. However, this one is purely an AoE one, so it's not going to hit their main target. And then for some more defenses, aspect of the protector on the helmet. This one can be found in Lost Archives in the Fractured Peaks. Gives you a barrier for 10 seconds, can only happen every 30 seconds. And this one only procs when damaging elite enemies. And then you can also pick up the aspect of disobedience. This one gives you just additional armor. Armor only affects physical damage. Now, speaking of defenses, down below we have a section that explains exactly how resistances and armor works and what to prioritize. Just to sum it up, armor only works on physical damage, resistances only work on elemental damage. To get your armor up and running, upgrade your gear regularly, so make sure to not fall behind here. So the resistance cap is 70, but you don't need to reach this one during leveling. After level 70, it's a different story. Try to cap this one to 70. It also gets harder with each world tier. So you get a minus 25 and minus 50% in tier 3 and tier 4. World tier 4 overrides world tier 3. And then you also have additionally damage reduction, which works both on elemental damage and your physical damage. Helps immensely when trying to build defenses. So if you're struggling versus everything, try to upgrade your damage reduction and your maximum health. Try to get your armor up and running. Try to look at the damage type that's killing you. Like for example, if you're in a swamp, try to stack poison and shadow resistance. If you're fighting versus hell enemies, try to stack fire resistance. For those situations, try to look at your gems. So for the gem slots, when you're trying to look at the gem, you will find multiple gems that are specific to a resistance. Like for example, sapphires give you cold resistance or skulls give you armor. So the rule of thumb for me was when trying to look at your gear during leveling, try to have one of each resistance. So on your helmet, for example, have poison resistance. On your chest, have cold resistance. On your boots, fire resistance. Then you have 2 slots, gem slots. So you have shadow resistance and lightning resistance. And then you can also slot in a skull. Or if you're struggling versus a specific damage type or you're missing one on the gear, slot it in through a gem. For the armor, you have 2 options. Slot in either rubies for maximum health or topazes for damage reduction while crowd controlled. Having 5 of those in your gear will result in 50% damage reduction while crowd controlled. This also works when you're just slowed. But if you're always unstoppable, the health one is better. And for the weapon, slot in the skull, gives you life on kill. Really nice way to sustain. Additionally to the 6% you get through the Vampiric Power and through the passive, you recover every time you use a skill. You can further combine this one with a helmet affix, so life on kill on the helmet will help you quite a lot to sustaining your health. Now as for other stats, go for defensive ones on the armor, maximum life, total armor, damage reduction while injured on the pants and on the boots, as well as on the amulet. Boots, movement speed after killing an elite enemy. Same with the amulet, those are priority stats. For the gloves, ranks in Lightning Storm and critical strike chance, as well as willpower. Willpower is a more multiplier, so try to get as much as possible. For the weapon, go for core skill damage. This one is unconditional. Then willpower, more multiplier. Then damage to distant, because you're most likely not going to be in close range. Then damage to close. This is to do with Thunderstruck, which is a Paragon legendary node we will get access to after level 50. And this one transforms the damage to distant and damage to close to a more multiplier, which is very, very nice to have. On the offhand, crit chance, cooldown reduction, willpower, and spirit cost. On the rings, crit chance, maximum life, damage to distant, damage to close on both, and that's about it. For the passive on the amulet, ranks to defiance are better early on, but later on you will get access to Poison Creeper when we swap to the endgame build, and this will give you access to Envenom, so a more multiplier on critical strikes. You also really want Earthen Might, so you're going to swap the passive from Perfect Storm to Earthen Might, so you're always guaranteed critical strikes, so you can perform better with a Lightning Dancer and Runeworker's Conduit. Now as for the Vampiric Powers, we want Prey on the Weak. So we now deal 16% more damage to vulnerable targets. Targets affected by the Vampiric Curse are also made vulnerable. We can combine this one with a Curse Touch. So we now have a lucky hit chance to inflict curse on enemies. This also has a chance to spread the Vampiric Curse on other enemies. So it will make those enemies also vulnerable. For sustain, we are going to pick Undying. For Unstoppable, Metamorphosis. So when we try to evade, we turn into a cloud of bats and become unstoppable for 4 seconds, which is quite a lot. We also deal a little bit of physical damage and inflict Vampiric Curse, which makes targets vulnerable. And to finish everything off, we have Bathe in Blood, which is basically just a damage boost. When we channel our skill, we spawn a pool of blood underneath us. This one provides us with a 40% more multiplier and we are receiving 30% less damage. So 30% damage reduction. This pool of blood can only form every 8 seconds, so it has a cooldown. Now, as for scaling the damage of this build, as mentioned before, we are going to get access to Thunderstruck. Thunderstruck is incredibly strong. Previously, stacked crit damage and vulnerable damage, but this one got changed in this season. So crit damage and vulnerable damage, both are now additional modifiers to the increased damage bucket. So they stack with core skill damage and damage to close. Crit strikes have now a 50% flat more damage multiplier. This one cannot be increased. It's a standalone damage modifier. And vulnerable has the same with 20%. So on a crit, 100 damage increases to 150. And for vulnerable damage, it's 100 to 120. The calculation is as follows. So first you have the base damage, which is determined by the item power. This one is then multiplied by the skill modifier. So if the skill deals 40% damage, this one is modified by that. Then you have the willpower modifier. Then you have the increased damage bucket. Then you have the crit multiplier if you crit. This one is static at 50%. Same for the vulnerable multiplier. If the target is vulnerable, static 20%. Then you have the more multipliers. So Defiance, Resonance, and Venom, and so on and so forth. All of those stack multiplicatively with each other. This makes skill levels incredibly strong. This season, stacking skill levels is really important. Even more important than last season. Willpower is also great. Core skill damage, a universal applicable increase to damage, always great. Then you have damage to distant. We can apply this condition very easily. But what about the close damage? Well, there is Thunderstruck. Thunderstrucks changes your close and distant modifiers to act like more multipliers. They doubled it. You have them in the increased damage bucket, but also they create now another more multiplier bucket. So the effect is as follows. You have 350 close and 350 distant. Those add to 700. Now 50% of this is then turned to a more multiplier, which is 3.5. Now if we are close to an enemy, we multiply our damage by 3.5 in the increased damage bucket if we don't have anything else in the increased damage bucket. And then we multiply it again by 3.5 unconditionally because we have Thunderstruck. And lastly, we also have attack speed. The lightning strike frequency is dependent on the attack speed. So we want to use a one-hander, not a two-hander. Gameplay will feel sluggish if you're using a two-hander, but there is also a secret sauce to everything. You don't actually want to hold the button because otherwise you're going to increase the stage of the lightning strike and you're not going to hit an enemy consistently with 2 strikes. So what you want to do is to press E, then release it, press it again and again and again and again. Don't hold down E, your cast button, but you tap it. This is also a little bit faster than just waiting for the strikes to occur. So, to sum it up, you have a gameplay strategy of channeling Lightning Storm to desired stage, then spam it, weave in Windshield for Spirit, use your Ravens as a passive damage tool, or if you're out of Spirit, use them as a cast, so the active portion, otherwise don't touch that skill. Use Earthen Bulwark only when you need the Unstoppable or Shield, and use Bloodhaul on cooldown to restore Spirit and health. If you want to transition into Endgame, meaning after 70+, so if you transition to tier 4, you have here a little bit of information how to do this. You're going to exchange your Earthen Bulwark for Poison Creeper, which will then synergize with a bunch of stuff. You want Earthen Might, but all of that will be covered in the endgame guide, which will be up once the season is up and running, because I'm going to start with this specific build and I'm going to check out how it performs with the new bosses, with the new balancing and all that shtick. And lastly, for leveling, try to stick to the overworld. It's going to be much faster and much more enjoyable. So with everything summed up, I hope you found this one useful. If you did, please leave a like. If you have any questions or remarks, please comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. You can also join the channel membership or leave a donation if you have the spare coin. So see you next time and bye.